It was supposed to be a simple Saturday, the kind where the sun rises slow and golden over the rooftops, and the only thing on my mind was whether to mow the lawn before or after breakfast. I'd lived in this neighborhood for just a few months, renting a house on the edge of the development while I waited for my new place across town to finish construction. I liked the quiet, the way the kids played in the cul-de-sac, the smell of fresh-cut grass, and the friendly nods from neighbors as they walked their dogs. I didn't pay much attention to the HOA, Homeowners Association, beyond the occasional newsletter that showed up in my mailbox, full of reminders about trash bins and lawn heights. I wasn't a member, didn't own the house, and figured their rules didn't really apply to me. That morning, I was out front, trimming the hedges, when I noticed two men in navy blue uniforms walking down the sidewalk. The letters HOA were emblazoned in bold yellow across their backs, and they moved with a kind of purpose that made me instinctively straighten up and wipe my hands on my jeans. They stopped at the end of my driveway, clipboards in hand, and exchanged a look before approaching. "Good morning," I said, trying to sound casual. The taller one, a man with a square jaw and mirrored sunglasses, didn't return the greeting. "We need to see your ID," he said, his tone flat and official. I blinked, caught off guard. "Excuse me?" The other man, younger and a little less sure of himself, cleared his throat. "We've had reports of a suspicious person on the property. We need to verify you're a resident." I looked down at my gardening gloves, then back at them, incredulous. "I live here. I'm renting from the Johnsons. Is there a problem?" The taller man's lips tightened. "We need to see your identification. If you refuse, we'll have no choice but to call the authorities. You could be subject to arrest for trespassing." My heart thudded in my chest, not with fear, but with disbelief. Arrest? For trimming hedges? I tried to keep my voice steady, but I could feel the heat rising in my face. "I'm not a member of the HOA. I'm just renting here for a few months." The younger officer shifted uncomfortably, glancing at his partner. "We still need to verify your identity. It's for the safety of the community." I looked around, noticing a few neighbors peeking through their blinds, curiosity and concern etched on their faces. I felt exposed, singled out, as if I had done something wrong just by existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. "I'm not showing you my ID," I said, my voice firmer now. "If you have a real concern, you can talk to my landlord. Otherwise, I'd appreciate it if you'd leave me alone." The taller man's jaw clenched. "This is your last warning. Show us your ID or we'll call the police." I stood my ground, refusing to be intimidated. "Go ahead. Call them. I haven't done anything wrong." The two men exchanged a look, then stepped aside to make a call on their radios, speaking in low voices. I could feel the eyes of the neighborhood on me, the weight of their judgment pressing down. I wondered how many of them would stand up for me, how many would just watch and whisper. Minutes later, a police cruiser pulled up, lights flashing but siren silent. Two officers stepped out, one older and calm, the other younger and eager. The HOA men waved them over, launching into a rapid-fire explanation about a non-compliant resident and refusal to show ID. The older officer listened, then turned to me. "Sir, can you tell me what's going on?" I explained the situation, keeping my voice as even as I could. "I'm renting here. I haven't broken any laws. I just don't see why I need to show my ID to the HOA." The officer nodded, his expression neutral. "You're right. The HOA doesn't have the authority to demand identification or threaten arrest. That's a matter for law enforcement, not them." Relief washed over me, but the tension in the air didn't dissipate. The taller HOA officer bristled. "We're just trying to keep the neighborhood safe. If he has nothing to hide, why not show his ID?" The officer shook his head. "That's not how it works. You can't police the neighborhood. If you have a legitimate concern, you bring it to us. Otherwise, you need to respect people's privacy." The HOA men looked frustrated, but the message was clear. The police left, and the two officers trudged back down the sidewalk, their authority deflated. I stood in my yard, heart still pounding, as neighbors slowly emerged from their homes, some offering supportive nods, others avoiding my gaze. I realized then that this wasn't just about me. It was about the power we give people who wear uniforms, about the lines between authority and overreach, about the right to exist without being constantly questioned. As I finished trimming the hedges, I resolved to learn more about the HOA, to make sure no one else in the neighborhood had to go through what I had. I wasn't a member, but I was part of this community, and I wasn't going to let fear or intimidation define my place in it. The next few days in the neighborhood felt different, as if a thin layer of tension had settled over the quiet streets and manicured lawns. I noticed more glances from neighbors, some apologetic, some wary, a few openly curious. The story of my standoff with the HOA officers and the police had spread quickly, morphing with each retelling. At the local coffee shop, I overheard snippets of conversation. "Did you hear about the guy on Maple Lane? HOA tried to have him arrested just for not showing ID." Some people seemed to think I'd been reckless. Others quietly admired my refusal to back down. I tried to go about my routine, but the incident lingered in my mind. I found myself replaying the confrontation, wondering if I could have handled it differently, if I had made things harder for myself or for others who might not have the confidence or the privilege to stand their ground. I started researching the HOA's rules, digging through the dense, jargon-filled documents that govern the community. Nowhere did it say that HOA officers had the right to demand identification from residents, let alone threaten arrest. Their authority was limited to enforcing community standards, lawn care, noise, parking, not policing who belonged and who didn't. The more I read, the more I realized how many people simply accepted the HOA's word as law, never questioning the boundaries of their power. That realization made me angry, but it also made me determined. I decided to reach out to my landlord, Mrs. Johnson, to let her know what had happened. She was appalled. "They had no right to do that," she said, her voice sharp with indignation. "You're my tenant, and you have every right to be there. I'll be calling the HOA myself." Encouraged by her support, I wrote a letter to the HOA board, detailing the incident and requesting a formal response. I made it clear that I was not a member, that I had not violated any rules, and that I expected to be treated with respect. I also asked for clarification on their policies regarding renters and the limits of their authority. Days passed with no reply. Meanwhile, I started talking to other renters and homeowners in the neighborhood. I learned that I wasn't the only one who'd been targeted. A young couple down the street had been threatened with fines for having a small garden in their front yard. An elderly man had received repeated warnings about his mailbox, even though it matched the community standard. A single mother had been told her children couldn't play basketball in the driveway after 6 p.m. because it was too noisy. Each story was different, but the pattern was the same. The HOA officers wielded their authority like a weapon, using fear and intimidation to keep people in line. The more I listened, the more I realized that the real problem wasn't just the rules. It was the way they were enforced, the way people were made to feel powerless in their own homes. I decided to take action. I organized a small meeting at the local park, inviting anyone who wanted to share their experiences with the HOA. To my surprise, more than a dozen people showed up, some bringing copies of violation notices. Others just wanted to be heard. We sat in a circle on the grass, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows as one by one. People spoke about their frustrations, their fears, and their hopes for change. The conversation was honest, sometimes emotional, but always respectful. We talked about what we wanted from our community: fairness, transparency, a sense of belonging. We agreed that the HOA should serve the residents, not the other way around. By the end of the meeting, we had formed a small committee dedicated to advocating for renters' rights and holding the HOA accountable. We decided to attend the next HOA board meeting as a group to make our voices heard. That night, as I walked home under streetlights, I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in a long time. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The HOA officers weren't likely to give up their power without a fight, but I also knew that we were stronger together. I thought about the moment when I'd stood in my yard, refusing to show my ID, and realized that it wasn't just an act of defiance. It was a statement. I belong here, and I won't be bullied into silence. The night of the HOA board meeting arrived, and the community center buzzed with nervous energy that was impossible to ignore. I arrived early, clutching a folder of notes and letters from neighbors who couldn't attend but wanted their stories heard. The room filled quickly. Homeowners, renters, young families, retirees, and a few of the familiar HOA officers in their Navy uniforms, standing near the back with arms crossed and faces set in stone. The board members sat at a long table at the front, shuffling papers and whispering among themselves, clearly not expecting such a turnout. As the meeting was called to order, the board president, a silver-haired man with a practiced smile, welcomed everyone and began running through the usual agenda: landscaping contracts, pool maintenance, upcoming community events. But the tension in the room was palpable, and when the floor was open for resident comments, I stood up, my heart pounding but my voice steady. My name is David, and I'm a renter on Maple Lane. I'm here tonight because I was threatened with arrest by HOA officers for refusing to show my ID, even though I'm not a member and have broken no rules. A ripple of murmurs swept through the crowd. I continued, I know I'm not the only one. I've spoken to many of you, homeowners and renters alike, who have been intimidated, fined, or made to feel unwelcome by the very people who are supposed to serve this community. We're here to ask for change. We want clear policies, fair enforcement, and respect for everyone who calls this neighborhood home. I handed the board my folder, filled with stories and signatures. Others stood to speak. Mrs. Lee, who'd been fined for her rose bushes. Mr. Patel, who'd been warned about holiday lights. The young couple with the garden. The single mother with the basketball hoop. Each voice added weight to the call for accountability. The board president tried to maintain control, insisting that the HOA was only enforcing the rules for the good of the community. But the mood in the room had shifted. People were no longer afraid to speak up. One by one, residents challenged the board, asking why the HOA officers wore uniforms that looked like police, why they acted as if they had the power to arrest, why renters were treated as second-class citizens. The officers in the back bristled, but the board members began to look uneasy, glancing at each other as the tide of public opinion turned against them. After nearly 2 hours of testimony, the board president finally relented. We hear your concerns, he said, his voice less certain than before. We will review our policies and address the issues raised tonight. We want this to be a welcoming community for everyone. It wasn't a promise, but it was a start. As the meeting ended, people lingered in the parking lot, talking in small groups, exchanging phone numbers, and making plans to stay involved. I felt a sense of relief, but also a new responsibility. The committee we'd formed decided to keep meeting, to monitor the board's actions, and to push for real reforms, clear guidelines for HOA officers, limits on their authority, and a commitment to treating renters and homeowners with equal respect. Over the next few weeks, the atmosphere in the neighborhood began to change. The HOA officers were less visible, their patrols less frequent and less confrontational. The board sent out a letter acknowledging concerns raised at the meeting and inviting residents to participate in a review of the community's rules and enforcement practices. For the first time, renters were included in the conversation, their voices valued alongside those of homeowners. I found myself talking to neighbors I'd never met before, sharing stories and ideas, building connections that went beyond property lines or lease agreements. The sense of isolation I'd felt after confrontation with the HOA officers faded, replaced by a feeling of belonging and shared purpose. I realized that standing up for myself had opened the door for others to do the same, and that together we could shape the kind of community we all wanted to live in. As summer deepened and the days grew longer, the changes we fought for began to take root in ways both subtle and profound. The HOA board, now under the watchful eyes of a more engaged community, moved forward with a promised review of their policies. They invited residents, renters, and homeowners alike to join a new advisory committee, and for the first time, the meetings felt less like a formality and more like a genuine conversation. I found myself sitting at a table with people from all walks of life. The elderly man who'd once been fined for his mailbox, the single mother whose kids loved basketball, the young couple of the garden, and even a few of the HOA officers, now without their intimidating uniforms, just neighbors among neighbors. We debated, sometimes passionately, about what rules made sense and which ones were relics of a more rigid past. We talked about the difference between safety and surveillance, about the importance of welcoming new families, and about the need for transparency in every decision. The board agreed to new guidelines. HOA officers would no longer wear uniforms that resemble law enforcement, nor would they threaten residents with arrest. Renters would be given the same respect and consideration as homeowners, and all enforcement actions would require clear documentation and a fair appeals process. The board also committed to regular community forums, where anyone could raise concerns or suggest improvements. The effect on the neighborhood was immediate. People began to relax, to trust each other a little more. The old fear of arbitrary fines or confrontations faded, replaced by a sense of shared ownership and pride. Kids played in the street without parents worrying about complaints. Gardens flourished, and holiday decorations became a source of joy rather than anxiety. I noticed more smiles, more waves, more conversations on front porches. The story of my encounter with the HOA officers became a kind of legend, retold at block parties and barbecues, not as a tale of conflict, but as the moment when the community found its voice. I was no longer the guy who refused to show his ID. I was just David, a neighbor, a friend, someone who cared enough to stand up and speak out. Looking back, I realized that the confrontation had been about more than just me or the HOA's overreach. It was about the right to belong, the right to be treated with dignity, and the power of ordinary people to demand better. I was proud of what we'd accomplished, but even prouder of the way we'd done it, through conversation, persistence, and a refusal to let fear dictate the rules of our lives. On a warm evening near the end of summer, as I sat on my porch watching the sun set over the rooftops, a few neighbors stopped by to chat. We talked about everything and nothing, work, family, the best place to get ice cream. As the sky turned pink and gold, I felt a deep sense of peace. I knew that challenges would come again, that there would always be those who tried to use authority to control or exclude. But I also knew that this community had changed, that we had learned to stand together, to listen, and to lead with respect. And as the stars came out, I realized that I was exactly where I belonged, not because of a piece of paper or a set of rules, but because I had chosen to make this place my home and to help others do the same.